A thin leather-bound journal with pages that looked as brittle as leaves in late autumn. At first glance, it seemed like just another old notebook that had been overlooked. But something about it made me pause. I opened it carefully, and that's when I noticed the handwriting. This wasn't a collection of random notes or observations. The writing was jagged and frantic, as if whoever had written it was in a hurry or in distress. And the content? Well, it wasn't something you'd expect in a dusty library archive. The first page contained a warning. To those who find this book, heed these words. The forces described within are real. They thrive on ignorance and arrogance alike. Do not call them unless you are prepared to pay the price. That warning alone sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was probably just a prank or the ramblings of someone with an overactive imagination. But then I turned the pages and things only got worse. The entries that followed were a disturbing mix of ritual instructions, personal confessions, and warnings. There were diagrams, rough sketches of symbols I didn't recognize, and lists of strange ingredients like mandrake root, goat's blood, and grave soil. Each ritual was described with painstaking detail, as if the author had either performed them many times or was desperate for someone else to get it exactly right. One entry stood out. It wasn't just a set of instructions, but a story, something the author claimed had happened to them personally. They wrote about summoning a demon to gain power, wealth, and influence, but instead of the life they imagined, they found themselves haunted by visions of their own failures. This struck a chord with me. It wasn't just about summoning dark forces for personal gain. It was about facing things you'd rather keep buried. And as someone who had spent most of my life running from guilt, shame, and regret, it felt personal. Like this book had been waiting for someone like me to find it. I spent the next few days obsessing over that journal. I read it from cover to cover multiple times, trying to understand the mindset of the person who wrote it. Were they delusional? A master manipulator? Or had they really stumbled upon something beyond the realm of logic? Part of me wanted to put the book back and pretend I'd never found it. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, wouldn't let me. I knew I had to investigate. I told myself it was just research, nothing more. I'd take some notes, explore the woods mentioned in the journal, and prove to myself that it was all nonsense. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about proving anything. I was chasing something, answers, closure, or maybe just an experience that would make me feel alive again. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I couldn't walk away. Before venturing into the woods, I did my homework. I scoured online forums, talked to a couple of local historians, and even reached out to a paranormal investigator I followed on social media. Most people dismissed my questions or told me to leave it alone. But one man, a retired professor who'd written a book on Salem's lesser-known occult history, warned me to be careful. There are things in those woods that don't care if you believe in them or not, he said. And once you've called them, they'll answer. Whether you're ready or not. That should have been enough to make me stop. But instead, it only fueled my curiosity. I packed a backpack with some basic gear, flashlights, a camera, snacks, and a pocket knife. I even brought some herbs the journal mentioned as protective charms, though I didn't really believe they'd do anything. Still, it felt better to have them. The night I chose for the investigation was cold and clear, with a full moon casting a silver glow over everything. Perfect conditions, I told myself. If anything was going to happen, it would happen tonight. The woods around Salem have always had an unsettling reputation. Even during the day, there's something off about them. A sense that you're being watched, that the trees are hiding secrets they'll never share. At night, it's worse. The shadows stretch longer, and every sound feels amplified. As I made my way deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The journal had described a specific clearing where rituals were supposedly performed, a place the author referred to as the Crossing. It took me nearly an hour to find it, but when I did, there was no mistaking it. The trees in that area twisted unnaturally, their branches interlocking like fingers. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, partially buried under moss and leaves. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The woods were eerily silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I set up my camera on a tripod, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. The journal's instructions were simple, but specific. Draw a circle with grave soil, place certain herbs around it, and recite the incantation under the light of the full moon. I followed the steps exactly, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. As I spoke the final words of the incantation, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing my flashlight. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, nothing happened, and then I saw it, a shape at the edge of the clearing. It was barely visible in the moonlight, more shadow than substance, but it was there, watching me. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, like every failure, regret, and mistake I'd ever made was being dredged up all at once. My mind was flooded with memories. The people I'd hurt, the chances I'd missed, the things I'd run away from. The figure didn't speak, but somehow I knew it was aware of everything. It wasn't just showing me my fears, it was feeding on them. The more I remembered, the stronger it became. The figure didn't have eyes, or at least none that I could see, but I felt it looking at me. Its gaze wasn't physical. It was as if it could peel away the layers of my mind, exposing memories and emotions I had buried so deep I had almost forgotten they existed. A cold, creeping paralysis washed over me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body refused to move. The figure circled me slowly, like a predator studying prey. As it moved, the shadows around it seemed to shift and ripple, distorting the trees and stones in the clearing. The air smelled strange, like old, wet earth mixed with something metallic, like blood. And beneath, that was another sin I couldn't quite place. Something ancient. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into my mind. You called me. The words slithered through my thoughts, slippery and wrong, as though they didn't belong to any language spoken by human tongues. I wanted to deny it, to insist that I hadn't really meant to summon anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Somehow it knew. There was no point in lying to this thing. The figure tilted its head, as though considering me. Then it whispered, "All those failures, all those mistakes, I can take them from you. I can make you whole again." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I hadn't expected this offer. A chance to wipe away the guilt that had followed me for years, the shame that clung to me like a second skin. I knew better than to make a deal with something like this, but the temptation was overwhelming. "I don't want anything from you," I whispered, though even as I said it, I felt the lie burning in my chest. The thing chuckled, if you could call it that. The sound was low and raspy, like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Liar, you want peace. You want freedom. I can give you that. For a price." "What price?" I whispered, my throat dry as sand. It didn't answer right away. Instead, it reached out one shadowed hand, or what I assumed was a hand, and touched my shoulder. The moment it made contact, a wave of memories flooded my mind. I saw my younger self, angry, lost, saying things I shouldn't have to people I loved. I saw faces of people I'd hurt, moments of regret playing over and over in an endless loop. The pain was unbearable, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the flood stopped. "All of it," the figure whispered. "All your burdens. Gone. Just say yes." I stood there, my mind spinning. The weight of my failures had shaped who I was. Without them, would I even recognize myself? What would be left of me if I let this thing erase everything? But there was another thought, a darker one. What if I never found peace? What if I carried my mistakes like a stone around my neck for the rest of my life, slowly sinking under the weight of them? The idea terrified me more than anything this creature could do. The figure stepped closer. I could feel its presence pressing against me, heavy and cold, as if the very air was thickening around us. "Say yes," it whispered again, and this time the words were soothing, almost kind. I felt myself wavering. The need for relief gnawed at me like a starving animal. But something stopped me. A memory, a small, fleeting moment surfaced in my mind. It was a conversation I'd had with my grandfather years ago, long before life became complicated. He'd told me that regrets were just scars of the soul, proof that you'd tried and failed but survived anyway. "You don't get to erase them, kid," he'd said. "You carry them, learn from them. That's how you know you're alive." The memory was like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I straightened up, taking a step back from the figure. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I won't do it." For a moment, the thing was silent. Then it tilted its head again, as if mildly amused. "So be it," it whispered, "but I don't leave without a gift." Before I could react, it lunged. The shadows around it stretched forward, wrapping around me like tendrils. A cold, sharp pain exploded in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was as if the thing was tearing something out of me, something vital. When the shadows finally receded, the figure was gone. The clearing was silent again, the air still and cold. I staggered back, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt different, as if something inside me had shifted, though I couldn't say what. I checked my camera, hoping it had captured something, anything that could prove what I'd seen. But when I reviewed the footage, all I saw was static. The figure, the shadows, the entire encounter. It was as if none of it had ever happened. But it had. I knew it had. And something told me that I wouldn't walk away from this night unscathed. At first, everything seemed normal. I returned home, exhausted but relieved that I hadn't made a deal with the thing in the woods. I told myself that I dodged a bullet, that whatever it was, it had no power over me because I hadn't accepted its offer. But that night, the nightmares began. In my dreams, I was back in the clearing, surrounded by shadows that whispered my deepest fears. I saw myself stumbling through life, making the same mistakes over and over, unable to escape the cycle. Each time I tried to scream, the shadows would tighten around me, suffocating me with their weight. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind. And it didn't stop there. Strange things started happening around the house. Lights flickering, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dead of night. At first, I tried to brush it off as stress or paranoia. But deep down, I knew the truth. The thing from the woods hadn't left me. It was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to break. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and frayed nerves. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure watching me. Every noise, every flicker of light felt like a reminder that it was still there. I became obsessed with finding a way to banish it, poring over books on occult rituals and demonology. But nothing worked. The thing wasn't just haunting me. It was inside me, feeding on my fear and regret, growing stronger with every passing day. People around me started to notice. Friends, co-workers, they asked if I was okay, if something was wrong. I brushed them off, telling them I was just tired. But the truth was I was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. One night, driven to the edge of madness, I returned to the woods. I knew it was a reckless, desperate move, but I had no other choice. If I didn't face this thing, it would consume me. The clearing was just as I remembered, silent, cold, and suffused with a sense of waiting. I stood in the center of the stone circle, gripping the journal in one hand and a pocket knife in the other. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The shadows stirred. The figure emerged from the darkness, its shape shifting and twisting like smoke. "Liar," it whispered. This time, I didn't run. I didn't beg. I stared into the darkness and said the only thing I could. "I forgive myself." The figure faltered, its form flickering like a dying flame. For a moment, it seemed confused, almost, "I'm afraid." And then, just like that, it vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. The weight in my chest lifted. The whispers stopped. And for the first time in years, I felt free. If you are currently enjoying this story, pause the video and please subscribe to the Horror Shack and make sure you like this video and leave us a comment saying I am enjoying the story, as this would help us get feedback and also encourage us to tell more true spine-chilling stories like this one. You ever make a decision you think is smart at the time, but in hindsight, you realize it was probably the worst thing you could have done? That's what moving into this house feels like now. But back then, it seemed like a great idea. I wasn't superstitious, and the stories about the place? They were just rumors. Something the locals talked about over drinks to pass the time. When I first heard about the house, I couldn't believe how cheap it was. I thought it was a joke at first, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an attic, and even a basement for half the rent of my tiny 1-bedroom apartment. The only reason it was on the market so long was because of some creepy folklore. Apparently, some guy who used to live here went off the grid a few years back. Just vanished. No sign of him. No goodbye letter. Just gone. But I wasn't going to let a ghost story scare me off. If anything, I thought it'd make great content for the online project I was starting. See, I was planning to debunk paranormal myths, record my day-to-day life here, show people that weird noises and hauntings were just the house settling or a leaky pipe. Nothing to be afraid of. I was going to prove once and for all that demons and ghosts are just nonsense we tell ourselves when we can't explain things. The house looked exactly how you'd expect an old, abandoned place to look. Faded paint peeling off the walls, a front porch that sagged in the middle, and a yard filled with weeds taller than my knees. The air inside smelled stale, like would rot and dust, but it was nothing I couldn't handle with a few air fresheners and some cleaning supplies. There was one weird thing, though. When I asked the landlord if the basement was locked for safety reasons, like maybe the stairs were unstable, he got this strange look on his face. All he said was, "That basement's been closed for years. Best leave it that way." Naturally, that made me even more curious. But I figured I'd deal with the basement later. I moved in, set up my cameras, and spent the first night just unpacking. Honestly, the place felt kind of peaceful at first. Quiet. A little too quiet, maybe, but I liked it that way. It didn't take long before small things started happening. The kind of stuff you'd expect in an old house. Like the doors didn't seem to stay shut. I'd close one, and a few minutes later, it'd swing open just a crack. There was a weird scratching noise that I heard at night, but it wasn't loud enough to bother me. Probably squirrels in the walls, I figured. Then, on the second day, I noticed that the kitchen light would flicker whenever I walked past it. I assumed it was just a loose bulb, so I climbed onto a chair to screw it in tighter. But here's the thing, it wasn't loose. It wasn't even burned out. Still, it kept flickering whenever I was nearby, as if it was reacting to me somehow. I told myself I was being paranoid, You know how your brain plays tricks on you when you move into a new place? Everything feels unfamiliar, so your mind fills in the gaps. That's all it was, just my brain trying to adjust. At least, that's what I thought at the time. A few nights in, I started having these dreams. They weren't exactly nightmares, but they left me feeling off. In the dreams, I was standing in the basement. Only the basement was much bigger than it should have been, like it stretched on for miles underground. And there was something else down there with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, just out of sight, watching me. When I woke up, my heart would be racing, and I'd be drenched in sweat, even though the room wasn't hot. I'd shake it off, thinking it was just stress from the move. But every night, the dreams got a little worse. The thing in the basement started whispering in my ear, saying things I couldn't understand. And yet, somehow, I felt like those words were meant for me, like it knew me. At this point, the weird stuff around the house was starting to add up. Objects weren't just moving around anymore. They were disappearing and reappearing in places I'd never put them. I'd leave my phone on the coffee table, and the next morning, I'd find it in the bathroom sink. One night, I left my laptop charging in the living room, and the next day, it was sitting on the floor of the attic. I couldn't figure out how it got there, but I wasn't about to freak out over some misplaced stuff. The real turning point came about a week in. I was filming myself doing a walkthrough of the house for my project when I noticed something strange on the video playback. In the background of one shot, there was a shadow moving across the wall. Only it wasn't my shadow. It was taller, thinner, and it seemed to glide instead of shift naturally. It was subtle, but it was definitely there. At first, I thought it must have been a trick of the light. Maybe the camera glitched, but the more I watched it, the less sense it made. The shadow didn't match anything in the room, and it moved independently, like it had a mind of its own. That's when I remembered the landlord's warning about the basement. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help myself. I had to see what was down there, so I grabbed my camera, pried open the old padlock, and went down the stairs. The basement was strange. It didn't smell like the rest of the house. It smelled like wet dirt and something metallic, like old blood. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with, I don't even know what. They looked like bones, but not from any animal I could recognize. And in the far corner, behind a stack of dusty boxes, I found a hidden door. The door wasn't locked, but it felt heavy, like something was pressing against the other side. When I opened it, I found a small compartment. Inside was an old leather journal, and next to it a camera. The journal was filled with pages of strange symbols, the kind you'd expect to see in some occult book. But what really freaked me out was the last few pages. They were written by the previous tenant. The entries were frantic, talking about a ritual they had tried to perform and how it had gone horribly wrong. They mentioned a demon, something ancient, something hungry, and they warned that once the demon was summoned, it couldn't be banished. The last page ended with a single line. If you're reading this, it's already too late. For the first few nights, I didn't notice much of anything unusual. The floors creaked a bit when I walked around, and the wind outside would whistle through the cracks in the windows, but that was pretty much it. It felt normal. Honestly, I started feeling kind of stupid for thinking something weird would happen just because people had said so. I spent my first few evenings getting the house in order, unpacking the essentials, setting up my bed, getting my camera gear in place. I wanted to make this whole project into a kind of vlog series, documenting everything in real time. The angle was simple. Move into a supposedly haunted house, stay for a few months, and show the internet that all those creepy stories are just local gossip. Easy content, right? But something small happened on the second night. I went to bed around midnight, nothing out of the ordinary, but when I woke up the next morning, my phone charger was missing. It wasn't plugged into the wall next to my bed where I'd left it. I searched for a good 20 minutes, checking under the bed, in my bags, even in the other rooms. Nothing. Finally, I found it in the kitchen, coiled up neatly on the counter, right next to the coffee maker. I know for a fact I didn't leave it there. I hadn't even used the kitchen that night. I must have muttered something about sleepwalking or being scatterbrained, but that was the first moment when I felt a weird tug in my stomach. Like maybe I wasn't alone, but then I shrugged it off. There had to be a logical reason. It was probably just one of those moments when your brain forgets things, like how you walk into a room and can't remember what you went in there for. No big deal. I went on with my day. The next weird thing happened 3 days later. I was editing some of the footage I'd shot when the power flickered for just a second, enough to restart my computer. I cursed under my breath because I hadn't saved my progress, but whatever, these things happen in old houses. When I booted the computer back up and loaded the footage again, I noticed something odd. There was a section in the video that hadn't been there before. A 5-second clip, wedged right between two moments I knew I'd filmed. In the clip, the camera was facing the wall in the living room, where someone or something had drawn a strange symbol in the dust. A circle with intersecting lines running through it. Like a child's scribble, but way too precise. Here's the thing, I didn't film that. I know I didn't. I rewound the video and played it again. Same thing. 5 seconds of nothing but that symbol. I even checked the timestamp, 2:36 a.m. That's when I'd been asleep upstairs. I told myself it had to be a glitch. Maybe a piece of corrupted data, a compression error. Hell, maybe even a prank I'd forgotten about. I laughed it off, saying into the camera, "Guess the house really wants to be famous, huh?" I didn't sleep well that night. By the following week, things were starting to get under my skin. It wasn't the big, dramatic stuff. No doors slamming shut, no creepy figures in the dark. It was the small things. Little whispers I started hearing in the middle of the night. They weren't words exactly, just noises that sounded like people talking, but too faint for me to make out. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe wind rustling through the trees, or the neighbors talking late at night. But the more I listened, the more I realized the sound was coming from inside the house. Sometimes it felt like it was coming from the walls themselves, other times from the ceiling. It wasn't loud enough to wake me up fully, but just loud enough to disturb my sleep. By the 4th or 5th night, I was so tired I could barely function during the day. My video updates became rambling messes of half-finished thoughts. I tried laughing it off, but you could tell I was on edge. I kept saying things like, "It's just the old house, it's just the wind," but the excuses were starting to sound weak even to me. And then came the night with the scratching. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging along wood. It came from the far side of the room, somewhere behind the wall. I froze, listening. It wasn't constant, just a few scratches here and there, as if something was trying to get out. I wanted to believe it was a mouse or some other critter, but it didn't sound right. It wasn't the quick, frantic scratches you'd expect from a trapped animal. It was slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their nails along the inside of the wall and stopping just long enough to make sure I was listening. I stayed perfectly still, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and started recording. I wanted to have proof, something to show people so they'd know I wasn't losing my mind. The video was shaky because my hands wouldn't stop trembling, but the sound was crystal clear. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I posted the clip online the next morning, hoping for some rational explanation. Most people said it was mice, but a few comments stood out. One person wrote, "Get out of that house. It's starting." Another said, "That's how it begins. They make you think it's harmless." I didn't reply to any of the comments. I just closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the walls. The real turning point came 2 nights later. I'd been avoiding the basement ever since moving in, partly because I didn't need anything from down there, and partly because it just gave me a bad vibe. But that night, something pulled me toward it. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt drawn, like I needed to see what was down there. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and it smelled damp, like old earth. I swept my flashlight across the walls, trying to get a sense of the layout, when I noticed a section of the wall that looked off. It was covered in a thin layer of plaster, but the edges were rough, as if someone had patched it up in a hurry. I grabbed a hammer and started chipping away at the plaster. It didn't take long to reveal what was behind it, a small, hidden compartment. Inside, I found two things: an old, leather-bound journal and a broken camera. The journal was filled with strange symbols, similar to the one I'd seen in the video, along with handwritten notes about rituals and demons. The last few pages were scrawled in a shaky hand, warning that the ritual has gone wrong and the door cannot be closed. The camera, though, that's what really got to me. I plugged it into my computer to see what was on it, and what I found sent a chill down my spine. When I plugged the camera into my computer, I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe old home videos or some forgotten family memories. What I found instead was something else entirely. There were only a few clips on the memory card, and most of them were corrupted. But the ones that played, they chill me to the bone. The first video started like a home recording, shaky footage of someone walking through the same living room I'd been sitting in earlier that day. The camera holder was breathing heavily, and their hands were trembling. The living room looked eerily familiar, but slightly different, less worn, like this footage was from years ago. Then, the person filming spoke, whispering in a panicked voice. "It's coming. I did it wrong. I opened it, and it won't leave." They pointed the camera toward the fireplace, zooming in on the same symbol I had seen drawn in the dust in my footage. Except here, the symbol wasn't just scribbled, it had been etched into the stone. Deep grooves carved it permanently into the wall, as if someone had spent hours scratching it in. The camera cut abruptly, and the next clip was even worse. The second video was filmed in the basement, the same basement I had just come from. Candles were scattered across the floor, flickering weakly, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. In the center of the room was a circle drawn in some kind of dark substance. Blood, maybe, though I couldn't be sure. Symbols surrounded the circle, matching the ones in the journal. A man appeared in the frame, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was chanting something under his breath, repeating the same phrase over and over, but the audio was too distorted to make out the words. Then there was a noise, a deep, rumbling sound like something shifting beneath the earth. The man froze mid-chant, his eyes widening with fear. He scrambled backward, knocking over a candle, and the screen filled with static. When the video resumed, the man was gone. The camera lay on its side, recording nothing but the empty circle. But in the background, I could hear something, a wet, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the floor. And then, something moved, just for a moment. A shadow flickered across the frame. Too fast to see clearly, but enough to make my blood run cold. The clip ended abruptly, leaving nothing but a black screen. I sat in front of my computer, stunned. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. I told myself it was just some old weird footage. Maybe the previous owner had been messing around with occult stuff, and it got out of hand. That had to be it. There was no way this was real. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in bed, every nerve on edge, listening for any sound, any movement. Around 3 a.m., the whispering started again. Only this time, it wasn't just faint murmurs. It was clearer, and it was coming from inside the room. I held my breath, heart hammering in my chest. The whispers grew louder, and for the first time, I could make out the words. "He's watching you. He's waiting." Then came the scratching. This time it wasn't in the walls. It was coming from under my bed. I lay perfectly still, paralyzed with fear. The scratching was slow and deliberate, as if whatever was beneath the bed was trying to taunt me. My phone was on the nightstand, just inches away, but reaching for it felt like an impossible task. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then the bed shifted, just a little, just enough to let me know that something was there. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone. With shaking hands, I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the edge of the bed. The light wavered as I slowly leaned over, dread creeping up my spine. And that's when I saw it. A hand, pale and skeletal, with long, blackened nails, slid out from under the bed. It didn't grab me, it didn't make a sound. It just rested there, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I froze, too terrified to move, too horrified to scream. Then, the hand began to retreat, slowly, deliberately, slipping back into the darkness beneath the bed. And as it disappeared, I heard it again. He's watching, he's waiting. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my keys and my phone, and ran out of the house without looking back. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked at a gas station a few miles away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand sliding out from under the bed, those whispers echoing in my mind. At dawn, I drove back to the house. I wanted to grab my things and leave as fast as I could. But when I stepped through the front door, everything was normal. No symbols in the dust, no strange noises, no sign that anything had happened the night before. Except for one thing, the journal and the broken camera were gone. I left the house that morning and never went back. I didn't tell anyone what happened, at least not the whole truth. I uploaded the videos I had recorded, but the footage with the symbol and the ritual was corrupted beyond repair. No one believed me, of course. They thought it was just a gimmick, a desperate attempt to go viral with a fake ghost story. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and sometimes late at night when the house I'm staying in is quiet, I think I hear it again, the faintest sound of scratching just beyond the edge of hearing. And I wonder, did I really escape? Or did I bring something with me? It was a cool October night on campus, the kind that sent shivers down your spine, and not just because of the falling temperatures. As Halloween approached, the air was thick with stories, ghosts, hauntings, and urban legends that always seemed to make their rounds as students shared their most frightening experiences. Little did I know, that night would change everything for me and my friends. Did you guys hear about that haunted building on campus? Mia asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. They say it's been abandoned for years because something terrible happened there. Yeah, some student went missing, right? Jason chimed in, leaning back in his chair at the library. I read that they found his belongings, but he was never seen again. That's why the building's off limits. We were gathered around a table piled high with books, but our focus had shifted from our studies to the unsettling tales that haunted our university. Our small group, me, Mia, Jason, and Sarah, thrived on the thrill of such stories, and as we swapped details, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. It's not just a legend, Sarah whispered, glancing around as if the shadows might be listening. People say they've seen strange figures in the windows and heard whispers echoing through the halls. I felt a chill creep down my spine, the thrill of fear combining with an unshakable curiosity. Let's go check it out, I suggested impulsively. The words slipped out before I could reconsider, and the others exchanged uncertain glances. Later that night, armed with flashlights, snacks, and a shaky sense of courage, we made our way to the infamous building. The moon hung high in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pathways. As we approached the decrepit structure, The excitement turned to trepidation. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" Mia asked, glancing at the crumbling facade. "Come on, it'll be fun," Jason replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I nodded, trying to mask my own growing anxiety. "We'll just explore a little, maybe take some photos for our project." We stepped inside, and the door creaked ominously behind us, as if warning us to turn back. The interior was dark, dust swirling in the beam of our flashlights. Old furniture lay strewn about, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. "This place is even creepier than I imagined," Sarah muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's split up," I suggested, trying to sound brave. "We can cover more ground that way." Jason, Mia, and Sarah hesitated but eventually agreed, and we separated into different rooms, each taking a flashlight and the sense of impending dread with us. As I wandered through the dimly lit hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My flashlight flickered, and I paused, feeling the cold air wrap around me like a shroud. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly scanned the area, convinced I would see a figure lurking in the shadows. Just then, I heard a soft voice calling my name. "Alex." I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. The shadows seemed to grow darker, and an unsettling feeling settled in my gut. I needed to find the others. As I turned to head back, I caught a glimpse of something, a movement out of the corner of my eye. I hurried towards the sound of laughter, the sound of my friends. "Guys!" I shouted, relieved to see them in the room where we had agreed to regroup. "Did you hear that? Someone just called my name." Mia raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Alex, don't joke around. This isn't funny." "It wasn't a joke," I insisted, trying to control the panic creeping into my voice. "I swear I heard someone." Just then, Jason, who had been rummaging through an old cabinet, exclaimed, "Hey, check this out." He pulled out an ancient-looking book, its cover worn and frayed. "What is it?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "It looks like some kind of journal," Jason said, flipping through the pages. "There are drawings and strange symbols in here." Mia leaned over to look. "Those symbols, they look like some kind of incantation." The room suddenly felt colder, and a strange energy seemed to pulse around us. "We should put that back," I said, my instincts screaming at me. But curiosity got the better of us, and we crowded around Jason, eager to explore the contents of the book. As we read the pages, a sense of unease settled over us. The journal detailed accounts of demonic encounters, each more chilling than the last. There were illustrations of grotesque entities, their forms twisted and malevolent. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I read about summoning rituals gone wrong and the entities that had escaped. "Do you think this stuff is real?" Jason asked, glancing around nervously. "I don't know," Mia replied, her voice shaky. "But we shouldn't be messing with things we don't understand." Just then, the lights flickered, and the air around us felt charged, as if a storm was brewing. The atmosphere grew oppressive, and the shadows seemed to inch closer, enveloping us in a dark embrace. "Let's just take a few pictures and get out of here," I suggested, trying to maintain a semblance of control. But even as I said it, I felt the unease spreading like a contagion among us. As we began to take photos, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, sending papers flying and extinguishing our flashlights. Panic surged through me. "What's happening?" In the darkness, we heard a low growl, resonating from deep within the building. "We need to go now," I shouted, fumbling to gather my things. But it was too late. The door slammed shut, trapping us inside. A sense of dread washed over us as the growling intensified, echoing through the halls like a beast stalking its prey. "Mia!" Jason yelled, his voice tinged with fear. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, but we need to find a way out," she cried, her eyes wide with terror. We rushed to the door, pounding against it, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows danced along the walls, coiling around us like living tendrils. Suddenly, the growling morphed into a cacophony of whispers, each one a frantic plea for help or a warning that something was very wrong. "Leave before it's too late." "It's the book." I realized, my heart racing. "It must have awakened something. Open it. Maybe there's a way to reverse this." Sarah shouted, her voice barely rising above the chaos. With trembling hands, Jason reopened the journal. As we gathered around him, the whispers grew louder, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Mia!" Jason suddenly yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. "Look out!" I turned just in time to see Mia being pulled backward, her face contorted in fear. A shadowy figure loomed behind her, its form shifting and writhing. "Help me!" she screamed, panic lacing her words. "No!" I shouted, lunging toward her, but it was as if the shadows had become a wall, pushing me back. "Do something," Jason urged, desperately flipping through the pages. "There has to be a way to help her." As he searched, I could see Mia fighting against the shadows, her body twisting as she struggled to escape the entity's grasp. "I can't hold on much longer," she cried, her voice breaking. "Here," Jason shouted, pointing to an incantation at the bottom of the page. "We need to recite this together." We formed a circle, each of us grabbing hold of one another's hands. The whispers intensified, a swirling storm of sound that threatened to engulf us. "On three," I said, my heart racing. "1, 2, 3. We began to chant the incantation, our voices rising above the chaos. The room trembled, the shadows pulsating as we poured our energy into the words. I felt the pull of darkness trying to drag me down, but I held on tighter, driven by the desperate need to save Mia. The shadows writhed and screamed, the cacophony building to a deafening crescendo. Just as I thought we would be overwhelmed, a blinding light erupted from our hands, illuminating the room and pushing back the darkness. "Keep going," Jason urged, his face a mask of determination. As we chanted louder, the light expanded, forcing the shadows back, but the entity roared in fury, its form shifting in the light. "You cannot banish me. I will claim what is mine." But our voices drowned out its threats, the power of our unity igniting a fire within us. "You have no power here," I shouted, channeling every ounce of strength into the chant. In that moment, the entity faltered, and I could see Mia struggling against its grip. "Help!" she screamed, her eyes wide with fear. "Just a little longer," I shouted, pushing through the pain as the light intensified, flooding the room as we chanted. The entity hissed, the sound reverberating through the room, and the shadows began to retract, reluctantly releasing their hold on Mia. With one final surge of energy, we cried out the last words of the incantation, our voices intertwining like a sacred thread. In an explosive flash of light, the shadows recoiled, and the entity screamed, a sound that pierced through the very fabric of reality. "No, you cannot do this," it shrieked, its form dissolving into wisps of darkness that evaporated into nothingness. Mia stumbled forward, falling into my arms as the shadows released their grip on her. "I thought I was going to die," she gasped, her breath rugged and uneven. "Are you okay?" I asked, worried about flooding through me. I glanced around the room. The oppressive atmosphere was lifting, the whispers fading into silence. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if a breeze had stirred the air. Jason, breathing heavily, dropped to his knees beside us. "We did it. We actually did it." Sarah looked around, her expression a mix of disbelief and relief. "But what was that thing? Why was it after us?" "I think it was tied to the book," I said, feeling the weight of the journal's presence. "Those rituals, they were summoning something dark. We need to destroy it," Mia said, her voice shaking, "before it comes back." Just then, the lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a harsh glare. The brightness felt foreign after the chaos, illuminating the dust and debris scattered across the floor. The oppressive energy that had filled the building dissipated, leaving only an eerie stillness behind. "Let's get out of here," I suggested, glancing at the door, which now stood ajar as if inviting us to leave. We hurried through the hallways, our hearts still pounding from the encounter. The atmosphere had shifted. The once menacing shadows now felt like mere remnants of a nightmare. We navigated the familiar route we had taken earlier, but each step felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of what we had just experienced. As we stepped outside, the chill of the night air enveloped us, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness we had just escaped. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating our path as we made our way back to campus. "Did that really just happen?" Jason asked, glancing over at Mia and me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I mean, we were just supposed to be exploring a haunted building." Mia shivered, hugging her arms around herself. "I don't think I'll ever be able to look at that place the same way again. What if there are more entities like that out there? Let's just focus on getting back safely," I said, trying to keep the mood light, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what we had faced. "We should destroy the journal. We don't want anyone else to get hurt." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I don't even want to think about the consequences if someone else finds it. We need to get rid of it as soon as possible." We reached the campus quad, the familiar sights and sounds bringing a sense of normalcy that felt surreal after our harrowing experience. As we made our way to the nearest trash bin, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you sure we should just throw it away?" I asked, the journal feeling like a heavy weight in my hands. "What if it can come back? What if it's not over?" Mia sighed, her breath fogging in the cold air. "We can't risk it getting into the wrong hands. Someone might find it and accidentally summon that thing again." With a resigned nod, I tossed the journal into the trash bin, feeling a strange sense of finality as it landed with a soft thud. We stood there for a moment, the reality of what we had done sinking in. "Now we just have to make it through Halloween without thinking about that place," Jason said, attempting a light-hearted smile. "Yeah, right," I replied, forcing a laugh, as if we could forget after tonight. But as we began to walk away, I felt a chill sweep over me again, as if the darkness was still lurking just beyond our sight. The laughter and chatter of students celebrating Halloween faded into the background as I felt a lingering sense of unease. The days that followed were a blur of Halloween festivities. Decorations adorned every corner of campus, and haunted houses sprung up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Yet, no matter how festive the atmosphere, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. One evening, while we were preparing for a Halloween party, I caught Mia staring out the window, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned about washing over me. "I just saw something in the woods," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It looked like a shadow, but it was moving. I followed her gaze, but all I could see were the trees swaying gently in the wind. "It's probably just your imagination," I reassured her, trying to brush off the unease that had settled in my stomach. "After everything we've been through, it's normal to feel jumpy." But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of the darkness that had haunted us in that building. The party was filled with laughter and costumes, but I found it hard to enjoy myself. I kept glancing toward the door, half expecting to see a shadow lurking just outside. Later in the evening, while Jason and Sarah danced in the crowded room, Mia and I stepped outside for some fresh air. The crisp night air was invigorating, but it didn't ease my growing anxiety. "Mia," I began, my voice low. "Do you think we really got rid of it? That thing? I don't know," she admitted, biting her lip. "I keep feeling like something's off, like it's not really over." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the courtyard, carrying with it a faint whisper that seemed to call our names. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Yeah," Mia said, her eyes wide. It sounded like the voices from the journal. We exchanged a worried glance, both of us feeling the cold grip of fear once again. "Let's go back inside," I suggested, taking her arm and guiding her toward the door. But as we stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The music that had once been lively and upbeat turned ominously quiet, the room falling into an uneasy silence. Everyone turned to look at us, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, rushing over. "You both look like you've seen a ghost. Did you hear the whisper?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. "The whisper?" Jason repeated, frowning. "What are you talking about?" Mia and I exchanged glances, realizing that our fear might be unfounded, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night progressed, I became increasingly aware of a growing tension in the air. Laughter felt hollow, smiles appeared strained, and I could feel an underlying current of dread that seemed to infect everyone around us. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the whispers returned, echoing through the room. "You shouldn't have come back." Panic erupted among the party-goers as people began to shout and rush for the exits. The music warped, distorting into a cacophony of confusion and fear. "Mia, we need to get out of here," I shouted, grabbing her hand. But before we could make it to the door, a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. "Did you think you could escape me?" It hissed, its voice low and menacing. "No, we didn't mean to disturb you," I cried, backing away as the figure advanced. "Disturb me?" it echoed, a cruel smile twisting across its features. "You invited me back into this world when you opened that journal. You think throwing it away would erase my existence?" The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The entity had never truly left. It had merely been lying in wait, feeding off our fear, preparing for its return. "Get away from us!" Mia shouted, pushing me behind her, but the figure merely laughed, the sound chilling to the bone. "You are mine now," it sneered, lunging forward. We stumbled backward, fear coursing through our veins as the darkness closed in around us. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I remembered the incantation we had recited, the words that had once held power over the shadows. "Jason, Sarah," I yelled, trying to gather my thoughts amidst the chaos. "We need to chant the incantation again." They looked at me, fear etched in their expressions, but there was a glimmer of understanding in their eyes. "Right," Jason shouted, determination flooding his voice. "Let's do this." We formed a circle once again, linking hands as we focused on the figure that loomed before us, its form writhing in the shadows. "On three," I said, my heart racing as I prepared to face the darkness together. "1, 2, 3. We began to chant, our voices rising in unison as we recited the words of the incantation. The air crackled with energy as the figure hesitated, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "No, you cannot bind me again," it screeched, its voice dripping with fury. The shadows around it writhed, reaching out like dark tendrils, trying to grasp us and pull us into their abyss. But we stood firm, focused on the light that surged within us, a light fueled by our collective fear, but also by our determination. As we continued the chant, the entity screamed, thrashing against the confines of the shadows. With each word, the air around us pulsed, the room vibrating with the force of our incantation. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from our circle, illuminating the dark corners of the room. The figure recoiled, its form disintegrating into wisps of shadow that swirled and twisted, struggling against the power we summoned. "Keep going," Sarah urged, her voice rising above the chaos. "We can do this." I could feel the energy of the chant coursing through me, a power born from our unity. We focused on our intent, channeling every ounce of strength we had. "Begone! You have no hold over us," I shouted, and the shadows shuddered, the figure wailing as it began to dissolve into nothingness. As the last words of the incantation escaped our lips, a shockwave of light burst forth, sweeping through the room and engulfing the entity. It let out a final, ear-piercing scream, a sound that resonated through the very fabric of our beings, before it vanished entirely, leaving behind only an eerie silence. Breathless, we stood in the aftermath, the room still and tranquil as if the darkness had never existed. The lights flickered back on, illuminating the shocked expressions of the partygoers, who had halted in their flight, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What just happened?" Jason asked, glancing at me, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. We bound it," I said, disbelief creeping into my voice. "It's gone?" Mia let out a shaky breath, the tension in her body releasing. "But what if it comes back?" "We'll be ready next time," Sarah said, determination igniting in her eyes. "Together, we can face anything." I nodded, still processing the enormity of our victory. The darkness had been powerful, but we had faced it head-on and emerged stronger. In the days that followed, we reflected on our encounter, the bonds of our friendship strengthened by the shared experience. Halloween passed, the festivities muted by our harrowing ordeal, but we found solace in each other's company. Each conversation tinged with a newfound respect for the unknown. We never spoke of the journal again, the memories of our battle fading into the background of our lives. But the lessons we learned remained imprinted in our hearts. As the winter holidays approached, we shared stories and laughter, grateful for the warmth of our friendship. The shadows had retreated, but the world felt different, the fabric of reality forever altered by what we had encountered. One chilly evening, as we gathered around a fire, I turned to my friends, the flickering flames illuminating their faces. "Do you ever wonder if we'll have to face something like that again?" Mia shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but if we do, we know we can handle it. We've already proven that." Jason grinned, raising his glass. "To face the darkness, whatever it may be. To friendship," Sarah added, her voice bright with hope. "To face it together," I said, a smile spreading across my face as we clink our glasses, the warmth of the fire and our camaraderie enveloping us. As we settled into the night, the shadows outside danced in the moonlight, but we remained undeterred, our hearts alight with the spirit of resilience and the knowledge that together we could conquer anything. Months passed, the chill of winter giving way to the warmth of spring, but the memory of that Halloween night lingered. Our friendship deepened, but the unease never fully dissipated, like an echo of a warning in the back of my mind. One evening, while browsing in a small antique shop, I stumbled across an old, ornate box. Something about it felt familiar, a tingle of recognition sparking within me. As I reached for it, the shopkeeper's eyes widened. "You might want to leave that be," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Some things are best left undisturbed." I hesitated, the weight of his words settling over me. The memory of the journal, the darkness, and the fear we had faced flashed through my mind. "Why? What's wrong with it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "Not everything that's old is harmless. Some relics carry the weight of their past, and they don't forget." A chill crept down my spine, and for a moment, I felt the shadows gather around me once more. As I stepped away from the box, the echoes of that night returned, reminding me that the darkness may retreat, but it always waits, lurking just beyond the edge of light, ready to pounce when least expected. I left the shop, a mix of dread and resolve coursing through me. I knew that the past may come back to haunt us, but I also knew that with my friends by my side, we could face whatever lay ahead. And as I stepped out into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of empowerment, ready to embrace whatever mysteries life had in store, because in the battle against the darkness, I had discovered the light within myself, a light that would never be extinguished. If you actually enjoyed these stories, please subscribe and leave us a comment to the next horror story you'll want us to tell. Till then, see you in the next one.